Strange as it may sound, the entire world is at this moment not necessarily revolving around Donald Trump and the various dealings in Ohio. For while American politicians and their followers are seeking to sew together some form of unity to defeat the opposition, on the other side of the world, matters are coming apart at the seams in a land where terrorists are waiting to see what unfolds and how they can take advantage of the confusion. And the Republican nominee for president dropped a bombshell about NATO overnight that has ISIS, other terror groups, the Turkish government, and 27 other nations concerned over a simple question. If there is a President Trump, does America have our backs in a time of potential war? You have our backs. Your phone calls. 1-877-NEWSMAX. 1-877-639-7629. Get on the line right now. Prepare to become part of the program on this topic. All right. Let's go long and a very important question. Welcome back the retired U.S. Army colonel who has served his country proudly on everything from Middle Eastern deployments to working for the Defense Intelligence Agency. Author of Government is the Problem, Colonel Patrick Murray. Colonel Murray, it's a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you, but once again, we have to talk about something that really has stressed out a lot of people here today. Donald Trump, in an interview with the New York Times, said that he would have the U.S. defend NATO allies only if they fulfilled their obligations, seeming to basically say that if you don't pay your bills, making it economic, we won't help you in a time for war. How dangerous is that to say that out loud?
Well, thanks for having me on. Look, I'm always amazed at how the inside of the Beltway media and career politicians cannot look past a single news cycle. And I've done international negotiations for years, and the Negotiations 101 is such that you're entering your first position needs to be hard. It needs to be tough. I think Trump is looking 3 or 4 moves down the road. Should he become commander-in-chief, he's laid out these guidelines, and I think that's what the way he's looking at this, because we have an alliance with NATO. And the fact of the matter is that of 28 NATO countries, other than us, only 4 of those NATO countries are adhering to their agreement to provide 2% of their GDP toward defense measures. And so I think what he's doing is he's setting out a tough position. You can always soften your position. You can always add some sweeteners. But if you go in soft like Hillary and Barack do and basically say, hey, whatever your position is, we're fine with that, that's not a negotiation. That is a capitulation.
Okay, I'll play devil's advocate here because you're right. You have to go in very strong. You have to make a point right away. And going in soft doesn't do it either. You can't go in weak. But isn't there some sort of a middle ground here? Because basically saying if you don't pay your bills, we're out. I mean, at a time with what's going on in the world right now, shouldn't he maybe just have thought of a different way to say it? Because you're right. Tell the people in NATO, we're not alone here. We're not going to foot the bill for you for the rest of time. But you still have to understand that we're here if you need us.
Well, that's a good point. And I'll just say this to the specifics of what he said. He didn't say we're not going to be there if you don't pay your bills. He just said, have you paid your bills? And like I said, this has to be a tough negotiation. And by the way, sometimes a little bit of tough love makes all of our allies stronger. And it's the old JFK adage, a high tide raises all boats. And I think that's what he's looking. He's also concerned about American taxpayer dollars and the fact that all of these countries have agreed to do this, but they're not doing it. In fact, it's not even close. And so we need to relook it. And I think he's trying to ratchet up the fact that our NATO allies are supposed to be providing for this common defense, if you will. And that helps us with our fight with Islamic extremists, particularly in Europe, as well as a growing bear over to the east called Russia and Vladimir Putin.
Let's talk about Islamic extremism here for a moment. The government of Turkey has suspended the European Convention on Human Rights. They now have a state of emergency for another 3 months. Meantime, we have a president there, Erdogan, who is appealing to Islamists in the wake of this failed coup. How concerned should we be that the president of Turkey is setting it up so that these potential Islamic extremists, these potential terrorists, are moving into a position of power in Turkey?
We should be very concerned. Look, Erdogan has been a Muslim Brotherhood guy, Sharia law guy for a long time. And I know this may sound a little counterintuitive to your very intelligent audience, but actually, I was rooting for that coup. Why? Because actually the Turkish constitution is such that when Ataturk set this up, it was a secular democracy, and the military was the guarantor of that. They've had 4 coups. It's like a sick patient, Ed. They take over, they heal the patient, and then they turn it back over. And that's what's happened before. Only now Erdogan has purged the military. He's purged the media. He's purged the government and everything else of anything other than not support to the Constitution, but support to him personally.
Do you feel, let me interrupt you for a second, do you feel, because you're right on point here, do you feel, as some have, that Erdogan may have even been behind this coup, in fact, because this helps him set up a dictatorship? This basically puts all the power in his hand and lets him do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and it'll be tough to get him back to democratic rule.
Yeah, I know there have been some theories along those lines, and I think the outcome is irrelevant whether he set it up or he didn't. He had his enemies list ready to go, and I think if there was a rump military who was actually trying to do what the Constitution set up, was to reset the nation to make sure they stay secular and democratic, whether that happened or not, the outcome, Ed, is still exactly the same. The purges are going to go on, as you mentioned at the outset, a state of emergency for 3 months. If he needs to extend it, he will. And in the meantime, everybody who is either his enemy or his perceived enemy, they're not going to see the light of day.
We're going to go to phone calls here from our viewers in a couple of moments. Get on the line right now about this, about Donald Trump's comments about NATO at 1-877-NEWSMAX. Colonel, before I let you go, earlier this week, General Michael Hayden was on the show. We talked a little bit about the war that is going on, and it is a world war. We've said that here many times. He made it very emphatic. More force will not solve the problems in the Middle East. You cannot kill your way out of this. Here's what he said.
This isn't just about killing, although there is necessarily some killing to be done. If we could kill our way out of this, we'd have been done more than a dozen years ago. This is a deeply complex question within the Middle East and within Islam. So as much as I support being tougher, being stronger, that's not going to end this problem. It's not going to wipe it away. We're going to have a lot of patience as well as we try to nurture this part of the world towards a more constructive reality.
Colonel Murray, I want to get your take on that and also ask you a question. How much more patience do we need?
Like any good American, I watch your show every day, and I respect General Hayden a lot, and he's exactly right. In fact, this isn't anything new. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, over a decade ago, said the exact same thing, that we're not going to kill our way out of this. Here's my point. If we'd have gone full bore on this about 3 or 4 years ago, back when Barack Obama was calling them the JV, there would be no ISIS now. There would not have been an Orlando. Would not have been a San Bernardino. Would not have been a Nice or any of these other things. But we're not. And that's why it's important to pick your commander-in-chief correctly and wisely. That's why amongst the military community, polls show that Donald Trump has more than a 2-to-1 advantage right now over Hillary.
Let me talk about that, because there are those who would dispute those numbers. There are those who would say that Hillary Clinton is the better choice. And as a matter of fact, those on the left, and we're going to hear it next week in Philadelphia, they will say that Donald Trump has absolutely no experience in foreign policy, no experience on the world stage. Certainly, he can find the right people who can help him along those lines. But the left will scream and they will say, Hillary Clinton, sure, she may have told a lie here and there, a little bit, white lie, that's what they'll say. But she has the experience. She's been Secretary of State. She's been there. She knows how to deal with these people. They'll say that experience in that field is more important in many ways than all the rest that goes along behind her. What do you say?
Well, of course they'll say that, but there's experience and then there's experience, Ed. I really liked Chris Christie's speech a couple of nights ago. So let's find a place. I would challenge Hillary supporters. Find me one place in the world, one place that's better off than it was from 8 years ago with Hillary and Barack. How about Libya? How about Benghazi? The Russian reset, a destabilized Iraq, Syria, Iran, the rise of ISIS, Venezuela. I mean, trashing our relations with Israel, China. Find me a place that's better off. So there's experience, Ed, but is that the experience that you want? And do you also want a commander-in-chief who, instead of rebuilding rebuilding the military is going to focus on things like global warming or anything else. She said she's going to be a third term for Barack. That's what we've had for 8 years. And so that's why the polls are strongly in support of Donald Trump over Hillary amongst the armed forces, and, oh, by the way, amongst our policemen as well.
I'm sure Donald Trump is going to address that this evening in his address, and I'm sure that Hillary Clinton's going to bash away at it next week. Colonel Patrick Murray, always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. We want to remind everybody that when it comes down to that speech, you will see Donald Trump's speech accepting the Republican presidential nomination right here on Newsmax live this evening. Our special coverage begins at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. We invite you to stick around. It comes up right after this show. Next up, there are those in certain areas of the country using a Yiddish word to describe the chances Ted Cruz has to become president in 2020. That only means one man can explain it all. Curtis Sliwa and your phone calls coming up next right here on The Hardline.